Roy Moore, the Republican nominee for a Senate seat in Alabama, spoke in Birmingham on Saturday. He has called the allegations against him a desperate political attack. Brynn AndersonAssociated Pres allegations that Roy S. Moore, the Republican nominee for a Senate seat in Alabama, pursued UAL and romantic relationships with teenagers while he was in his 30s have upended a race in a state that has not had a Democratic senator since 1997, while Alabama Republicans, by and large, defended Mr. Moore against what many of them described as a partisan plot. National officials have reacted with shock and disgust, and the shift away from him has been particularly pronounced in the chamber he hopes to join. The National Republican Senate Committee is no longer raising money for Mr. Moore, and most Republican senators say he should end his campaign if the allegations, reported by The Washington Post on Thursday and based on more than 30 sources, including 4 accusers quoted by name, are true. Here is a roundup of how the Senate's 52 Republicans have responded. I can no longer endorse his candidacy. Senator John McCain of Arizona called the allegations against Mr. Moore deeply disturbing and disqualifying. Tom Brenner, New York Times. 4 senators, John McCain of Arizona, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Steve Daines of Montana, and Mike Lee of Utah, unequivocally renounced Mr. Moore. Mr. McCain was the first, tweeting on Thursday that Mr. Moore should step aside. The allegations against Roy Moore are deeply disturbing and disqualifying. He should immediately step aside and allow the people of Alabama to elect a candidate they can be proud of. John McCain at Sen. John McCain, November 9, 2017. Mr. Lee tweeted on Friday, having read the detailed description of the incident, as well as the response from Judge Moore and his campaign, I can no longer endorse his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. Mr. Daines and Mr. Cassidy quickly followed. A 5th senator, Bob Corker of Tennessee, wrote that Mr. Moore should never have been nominated to begin with. Look, I'm sorry, but even before these reports surfaced, Roy Moore's nomination was a bridge too far. Senator Bob Corker at Sen. Bob Corker, November 11, 2017. If true, Senator John Cornyn of Texas, the majority whip, said that Mr. Moore's candidacy would be unsustainable if the allegations were true, but that we believe in a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Gabriella Demchuk for The New York Times. By far the most common reaction has been a call for Mr. Moore to step aside if the allegations are true. 31 senators have said this, though none have explained what criteria they would use to judge the truth of the accusations. If the allegations are true, I don't think this candidacy is sustainable, John Cornyn of Texas said, but we believe in a presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and so I think it's important for the facts to come out. Texas other Senator, Ted Cruz, called the report serious and troubling but added, Judge Moore has the right to respond. Lamar Alexander, John Barrasso, Michael Bienzi, Joni Ernst, Cory Gardner, Orrin G. Hatch, John Hervan, James Emmenhoff, Ron Johnson, James Lankford, Mitch McConnell, Jerry Moran, Lisa Murkowski, David Perdue, Jim Risch, Pat Roberts, Mike Rounds, Marco Rubio, Richard C. Shelby, Dan Sullivan, John Thune and Tom Tillis also made if true statements. Others, though they included the caveat, seemed more inclined to jettison Mr. Moore. Jeff Flake of Arizona said Mr. Moore should step aside if there is any shred of truth to the allegations, and Susan Collins of Maine and Ben Sasse of Nebraska spoke similarly. Patrick J. Toomey of Pennsylvania and Tim Scott of South Carolina said they found the accusations more believable than Mr. Moore's denials. Rob Portman of Ohio said he assumed they were true because the women making them were on the record. And Lindsey Graham of South Carolina said Mr. Moore should be dealt with very severely if he behaved as reported. Any person who believes these allegations are not that bad, Mr. Graham told ABC's affiliate in Columbia, South Carolina, I don't want them to be a part of the Republican Party. Start thinking about who they'll write in. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said she had spoken with Luther Strange, Mr. Moore's Republican primary opponent, about a write-in campaign. Michael Reynolds, European Press Photo Agency. It is too late to replace Mr. Moore on the ballot, but Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Sasse and Mr. Toomey have floated the idea of a write-in campaign, perhaps by Luther Strange, who holds the seat Mr. Moore is seeking but lost the Republican primary. Last week Mr. Strange called the report very, very disturbing and said he would later have something to say about whether he would re-enter the race. If there's an ounce of truth to any of this, Roy Moore has no place in public life and ought to drop out immediately, Mr. Sass said. Alabamians should start thinking about who they'll write in. Ms. Murkowski, who won a write-in campaign herself after losing a primary in 2010, told Politico on Thursday that she had spoken with Mr. Strange, who told reporters he was researching his options. But a write-in is very difficult. Let's face it, Mr. Toomey acknowledged. There's no easy solution to this. They're very, very old charges. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi questioned the allegations, calling them very, very old and asking why the women did not come forward sooner. Al Drago for the New York Times. Only one senator, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, explicitly declined to suggest that Mr. Moore stepped down, even with the "if true" caveat. Why, he asked, didn't the women who spoke to the Post come forward early? They're very, very old charges, Mr. Wicker told Mississippi News Now. You have to ask, and I think people in Alabama will be asking, why this hasn't come out in the 40 years' time with him running for so many offices. 14 senators, Roy Blunt, John Boozman, Richard M. Burr, Shelley Moore Capito, Thad Cochran, Tom Cotton, Michael D. Crapo, Deb Fisher, Charles E. Grassley, Dean Heller, Johnny Isakson, John Kennedy, Rand Paul and Todd Young, have not responded publicly to the allegations. But Mr. Blunt is no longer attending a fundraiser for Mr. Moore on Friday. Follow Maggie Astor on Twitter at Maggie Astor.